Hi, and welcome into Real Conversations, a film podcast that seeks to explore the history of the Reel-to-Reel International Film Festival presented by the Cleveland County Arts Council. I'm Festival Director Thomas Manning, and I'm joined today by writer and director Tom Van Avermaet, talking about his short film Hearts of Stone, an official selection for Reel-to-Reel 2025. So, Tom, thanks so much for your time. It's great to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And before we head into talking about Hearts of Stone specifically, I'd love to have you share a little general background about who you are as a filmmaker for our audience. I know you're an Oscar-nominated filmmaker. You had a short film back in 2013, which you co-directed, I believe.
No,
And
no, so only me directing.
okay, you direct, correct. That's it.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna
So
claim sole credit for that one.
yeah,
I mean, this one like Hearts of Stone, I co-wrote with a friend of mine, but I've never directed with someone else. So.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, so I've been a filmmaker for a little bit. The thing with me is there's always a bit of a gap between the films that I make, because they're pretty hard to make, to put it honestly. I did a thesis film called Dreamtime, which was my start. I did film school in Belgium, and that did festivals all over the world, and then I had the fortune to make a film called Death of a Shadow, which we talked about before. Was nominated for an Academy Award, which was a special process. Then it took a long time for me to make a new film, which is Heart of Stone, which is the one I'm presenting at the film festival as well. So that's a bit my background. I've always been a director, writer, so I've always written on my own work.
And Hearts of Stone is basically a love story about statues, some living statues, and then statues that actually come to life. So I'd love to ask you, can you recall the first time that you saw, a street artist that we know is living statues?
The first time I really noticed them was at a festival of statues, because like you always see these people in the background, or they're like one or two performers. I never really focused on them until I went to like a proper living statues festival, something like we also see in the film, which is a thing that happens more often than not in Belgium, I think, than and in the Netherlands than other countries, because like it's a bigger thing here. And I was really fascinated by those people who dress up as statues, and I wanted to kind of imagine what their world would be like, and what a character that is a living statue would think or feel. And I kind of tried to mold that into my own narrative, with a friend of mine. I wrote it with a friend of mine, called Alison Kathleen Kelly. And we tried to explore that world a little bit. And I've always been fascinated by impossible love stories. And I thought, what it could be more impossible than to be in love with a statue? And I felt like, what person would be more natural to fall in love with a statue than someone who is already pretending to be one?
I love that. Oh, that's beautiful. And the two main actresses in this film, we have Numi Rapace and Jessica Barden. Um, and I'd love to talk first about Numi Rapace. And with her introduction in this film, I think it's like 6 minutes into the film before we hear her first line of dialogue. Um, I'd love to hear some of your thought process behind that choice. I thought that was just a wonderful decision to give her the space to really emote and just build up something emotionally that without the distraction of dialogue. So I'd love to hear more of your thoughts as director in building up that choice.
I think it's a little bit my style in a way. I always like to try and say as much as I can with visuals, and also in a way, for me, one of the main things about film acting is looks. So how people can tell so much with just one look, and I'm really fascinated by that. So I always try to find ways to have, even though this film actually has quite a bit of dialogue, I try to find these moments where the talking is done through the eyes, which I think is really unique about film, or television, but film even more, is that there's so much expression in eyes that you can catch. And if you're lucky enough to have a good actor like we had, or good actresses like we had, They can tell so much just by one glance, which I find really, really special about film acting.
And as far as casting Numi and Jessica, what was it about them that you knew that they were exactly the two that you wanted to lead this film, and how did you get them to come onto this project?
So I've always wanted to work with both of them. I was a really big fan of End of the Fucking World, where Jessica plays the lead in, and The Lobster, which she also plays a part in. And Numi I've been following for a long time. And I always thought like, these are kind of people I put in my wish list of to work with. And then when I wrote the story, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to go just for the people that I really, really want, even though it might seem a little impossible? And I said, like, why not? And I was fortunate that I had this baggage of the Academy Award nomination that did open those doors a little easier. Also, the help of a casting director in England that helped us get to the representation in Europe and in England, which, funnily enough, is a bit easier than going through the States. Because even though we're both at the same agency in the States, it was easier to go through the European and the UK representation to get the story to them. And that's the biggest hurdle in a way. Sometimes with people of that stature, is just getting it to them because they are actors, and actors, what do actors want to do? They want to perform. They want to play interesting parts. Hopefully, we created an interesting part. And in that sense, I think once you get past those gates, it's much easier. And they also both wanted to work together, which was beneficial to us. So in the end, it was a good total package.
Yeah, and when we see Jessica's character first kind of coming to life, the special effects with that process almost feels based in body horror. Um, was that kind of at the forefront of your conversations with your effects team? And I think you were a visual effects producer on this film, if I have that
Well,
correct.
yeah, it was so the biggest time or the longest time that we spent on the film, which was years, was the VFX. The VFX was quite intense and difficult. Mostly the look for Jessica's character Agatha when she comes to life, the statue that comes to life, and it wasn't necessarily body horror for that specific moment, but more like I wanted to have a very visceral reaction. That's why it's very important that also with the sound you play with the fact that there's stone moving. You see her body's moving. It's like in between life and still in between statue and living, and that's what we really wanted to play with. Also, like it's a statue that's been standing there for hundreds of years, or so what would that look like? And so dust, there would be a lot of dust, there would be a lot of things happening that make it feel like it actually is becoming something else than a statue or something in between, which is what we wanted to go for.
Yeah.
And another element, if I may, is
Oh yeah.
like one thing that we really had to play with bringing a statue to life was the eyes. And this is something we had to go back to what sculptors actually do, which when we look at our eyes now, there's a little reflection of the watery film on our irises, and that's really important for emotions. But a sculpture, in essence, doesn't really have that. So what does a sculptor do? They put this little bar inside the eye to mimic the reflection of light in the eye. And once you put that into the eye, all of a sudden things become alive again, which is something we had to discover, almost like you learn what a sculpture does in our VFX process.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a quote, I think it's Numi's character has in this film. She says, "It's the flaws that make something truly beautiful." And that really stuck with me. And I think you can kind of have that as, one of the thesis statements for this film. So I'd love to hear, you kind of reflect on that quote. And was that something that you wrote or that your co-writer wrote? And, kind of building the film just around that message there.
So, I mean, I was the most heavily involved with the dialogue. So it's something that comes from me, and it's something I do believe is like because the movie is about love, and also it's about like loneliness in a way, and people wanting to be seen, and perfection is interesting as a concept, but what's even more interesting, I find personally, is imperfection. And even when there is a flaw in something that can give them something extra, like in the film, it's a crack above the brow of Agatha's statue is a flaw, but then to Numi's character, it's become something that's part of um, the person or the statue that she fell in love with. So it's like that overcoming of those flaws and looking at those flaws as actually something that make you into someone special was important to me. Like I mean, I have my own flaws. I have like a birthmark above my eye, so like I can play with those kind of things because I hope that that can be something as well in a way.
Absolutely. And music plays a pretty significant role in this film as well. And I want to talk first about the score from Marko Jukic, I believe. And I'd love to hear more from your standpoint as director, what Marco brought to the table. And it feels like really for most of the runtime, there's just a score kind of just guiding us along. So can you talk more about that collaboration with Marco?
So I mean, so with Marco is actually this is actually his first score. The film was a co-production with Croatia, and one of the rules was that there was supposed to be a Croatian composer. And through the co-producer, I got in touch with Marco, and Marco at the time was studying classical composition in Munich, in Germany. So like a proper classical composer, which was in a way exactly what I wanted because like one of the things that was important for me is like the film looks a lot at a sort of past that's never been. And I wanted to play with also things that inspired me as a filmmaker, like the scores of classical movies, which something we don't see as often these days is like a score that's does guide the audience as well through the film. So I wanted to bring that into the film. And it was also important that it was a very romantic sounding score, even the romantic era in classical music, that we went full on for that, which was complicated because we wanted to go for an orchestral score, which for a short film is not a given. And in a way, we kind of made a deal, me and the composer, Marco. I said to him, look, um, we want to do this in a certain way, and we both want to do an orchestral score, but we have all these limitations that we have as a short film. There's two ways we can go. Either you get paid, or you invest what you get paid into the movie. I will put in the same, and then we go find an orchestra. So neither one of us gets paid, but at least we work with an orchestra, and we managed to do find an orchestra in Eastern Europe, in Bulgaria, where we were able to record everything orchestral. So every instrument in the film is actually a real instrument, which was also kind of fitting for this film, I found. Like even the glass sounds, it's a special instrument called a verrophone, which is a bit what is an instrumental version of a glass harp. The glass harp is when you put water in glasses and people like turn their hands across the rims of the glasses. So the Verifone is kind of the instrumental version of that. There's only like a few of them in the world. We were able to find like a player in Germany who recorded it in his own apartment, and then we mixed that back into the score. So um, I was always been a dream of mine is to do a film with a real orchestra. So in that sense, it was also kind of like a special element in the film. And I always loved film music, and I had certain examples that I wanted to work with, and I gave that to Marco, and that's kind of how we bounced back and forth in the process of trying to figure out what the score would be.
And I think the musicality of the film really builds up to this climactic moment with this dance scene between Jessica and Numi. Um, And I just think that was a very powerful scene, and I just think dancing is extremely cinematic, just on its own merits. And when you can build up to that effectively, like you did here, and really capitalize on something emotionally impactful, I know I'm sure that's something you put a great deal of thought into. Can you discuss a little bit of the dramatic buildup to that sequence and then delivering and making sure you were getting the most out of that moment?
Sure. So it was always like from the conception of the film, like even the very, very start, I knew I wanted to have this like as a focal point. I wanted there to be this dance that is specifically suited for living statues. And that's how we would kind of work backward as well. We kind of always said like, okay, this has to be a turning point in the movie. This has to be a focal point that we get to in our storytelling as well. So even in the storytelling, it was always like an important part. And that's kind of how we built up to that in our storytelling as well. Is like we always knew this is something we want to end up at some point, at least in the end of the movie. So in that sense, it was always a crucial factor to have that in the movie. And because we kind of introduce certain elements like the glass, we tones, we come back into the dance. We try to kind of work with things like when you kind of blur the line what is core and what is actual music in the film, in the scene in the film. And I thought like that's a really interesting thing to play with as a filmmaker, which I always like to kind of play with like what is real, what is not real. I try to make like very imaginative films where that line always kind of blurs. I try to make them as realistic as possible, but in their own reality, not necessarily in the reality that exists in the real world. Which is interesting. The Reel to Reel Film Festival is a good title to to have a film, our film that way. So that was definitely a pivotal thing. But unfortunately, and this is what's interesting to know, because this was shot as the very last scene of the movie, and as you might know, like filmmaking is a tough process, and we only had 4 days to shoot the film. And we kept running over and over, and it was a night shoot, and it's like at a certain time the actors had to leave because they had to catch a flight back to England because both were had other projects going on. And we were like, okay, well, but we have to have every scene is important, so we kind of have to go forward, and then we come at a point. Okay, now we have 1 hour to shoot this scene with the actors, which was a bit of a nightmare for me. And we start the process, and at a certain point, um, the actors had to go. And this was a little bit of a traumatic experience for me because, like, at first time, I kind of felt like I didn't know if he really had it. And I was a bit unsure about that. And then the actors are have to go, and you're kind of like, ah. So you're kind of pressed to the reality of things. But fortunately, we were able to shoot some more time with the extras, and I think it all works fine. But that was like a tough scene on that sense for me. Also complicated scene because you have a choreography, you have we worked with the crane, so like it's was the most complex scene, but because you keep running out of time, you end up having to shoot that in a lot less time than you would envisioned. But luckily for us, we had a choreographer working with the extras the whole day. So during the times that we were setting up, they could work with her just to prepare for the dance. So in that sense, they were very prepared, and we managed to pull it off, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. And your director of photography on this film, Hans Bruck Jr., I think his work is something that really ties everything together here. Just there's just a softness to everything, and kind of a capturing the delicate beauty of the situation, both visually and thematically. Can you share a bit about your work in collaboration with Hans and why his work had the impact that it did for the audience and for the viewer?
So I mean, I make very visual films, so for me, that relationship is really important with the DP. This is the first time we work together. So actually, on all my films, I worked with a different DP, always with very talented people, luckily. But it's what I try to do at least is try to prepare as much as possible and kind of give him as much information of kind of like, this is how I see it, give examples like paintings and like even jokes about that my lookbooks are like this. But I try to kind of give as much information to him that he can kind of get like, okay, this is what he wants. And then he adds all the talent that he has to the equation. And when we're shooting, because there's so little time, you have to kind of be in sync, even though we haven't worked together before. So that's in a way that's a challenge. But like, luckily enough, someone as talented as him, um, he can bring that extra touch to the film that we need. And we always discussed like we wanted to shoot anamorphic, because I love widescreen. He loves widescreen photography. So we both were on the same page that way. We shot on the sunny Venice, which was new for me, but because we were shooting a lot in low lights, we discussed like, okay, we don't have a lot of time to set up. We don't have a lot of lights. So how do we still manage to do everything we want to do? And which camera do we need for that? And Sony Venice was the camera that we came up with that was able to do that at the time, better than the Alexa, which we were also discussing. And I had a bit of a preference for, but like I think what happened was we did manage to capture something like unique in a sense, like also with the lens that we used, which was an older lens, an older anamorphic lens, which has its own kind of special body to it. And that's the softness that you talked about is a lot of with those lenses that you get that. And that's why it's so important to work sometimes with older lenses because they give a certain body that like a newer lens might be super sharp, but for us, we needed that softness and that kind of dreamy quality. So sometimes then it's better to work with older lenses, which has its flaws because you have a very difficult depth focus level. Field of depth of field is very narrow, and you can even lose focus when you make one small step. So it's quite hard on the focus puller. But like it does add like something really interesting. It adds also sometimes distortion at the sides, which then becomes its own thing and adds to the kind of surreal quality of the film that we wanted to give.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tom, you and I are sitting here. You're in Belgium. I'm over here in North Carolina in the U.S. And I think that really speaks to the importance of international film festivals. And for you, I'm sure the film festivals have a special place in your heart that your work gets to be seen by audiences all around the world. Can you speak a little bit on, what festivals like this mean to you and why their place in indie cinema is as important as it is?
Like, I think for short films, they are absolutely vital because it's the only way usually that a film has a chance to be seen on a bigger screen. And especially for filmmakers like me who make films for the big screen, even short films, it's essential that festivals like Reel to Reel exist. And for me also, it's like really special to now bring it to a North Carolina audience. I used to I've been following the NBA for a while, and my team is now the New Orleans Pelicans, but they used to be the Charlotte Hornets, now the Charlotte Hornets again. So I always had a little bit of a connection in that sense with North Carolina. So I'm really happy that the film can play in North Carolina for the audience there. So I think it's really special for me to because you come with like an idea and then uh, it takes a long, long time, a lot of effort to make a film, and you hope that that film is able to be seen. And then, luckily, thanks to film festivals like Reel to Reel, it has an opportunity to be seen by people all over the world, and I'm very thankful for that.
We are here on Real Conversations talking with Tom Van Avermaet, director of Hearts of Stone, which we'll be showing at Reel to Reel. And for those listening, hope you'll join us at the Joy Performance Center in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. The Reel to Reel Film Festival will be held July 23rd through the 26th. We hope to see you all there. And Tom, can't thank you enough for your time and really excited to be showing your film to our audience.
And thanks so much for having us.